change.
Sorry. Yep. Sorry, guys.
That the city is wanting to change the zoning of that area. And they're not happy about that.
Okay.
So I guess, is that part of 2D to evaluate the need and incorporate owner occupied duplexes? Would that be where they're getting at changing it? I think it's R3 is what they were saying. Is that correct?
Would be, I'm not entirely sure on it.
Okay.
But
I just,
to further your point of, I think a lot of us within this group are, we're advocates that we need more housing, but
Yep.
there's also, what's kind of brought up with public hearing notices that there's also folks that are against it. And maybe a component of this is to make sure that we promote public engagement and just leave it as simple as that when it comes to housing development, not necessarily for and or against, but at least having the transparency of public engagement. And that might cover the.
I want to reinforce what Dave is saying, because I also got some calls in the last week or so about an additional to what I had mentioned the last time we had met. And there was a lot of concern around changing zoning from R2 to R3. And one of the people who brought these concerns to me also attended Chuck's presentation and felt that R2 zoning was sufficient enough to do the incremental building that he discussed in the presentation, and wondered why there was consideration for R3 zoning. And I will say that in their opinion, in their thought process of this, if there are blocks that are already 90% rentals, that might make sense. And so I am curious to what direction we want to steer this. And also these folks are feeling like they're not seeing the deep engagement that there should be seeing. It's a lot of like superficial, what do you love about Winona? What do you want to see about Winona? And not like kind of these nitty gritty things when it comes to housing that a lot of people have a lot of feelings about.
so what, I guess, at what point, I know we had the engagement on, but is there another point at which any of this gets brought to the community and they have an input, or is this now from what we do that it goes to
my knowledge, I thought there was a second public engagement piece.
That would be the planning commission.
I would imagine with that.
Yeah.
And I'll check with Carlos and Luke if part of the contract because it would make sense with engagement owner that once drafts are put together, and probably even before maybe planning commission and council would do the drafts, that there would be a public input session upon it. I can only imagine that there would be, but I'll confirm that.
That would be good. Other people can say what they think about what we have instead of just us, and other people can come give their opinions, and we can take that in for consideration too.
I think it's going to be important too, so that there is a opportunity for, I can't think of the word, the word that comes to mind, which sounds really cringy, is buy-in, but like that people feel like we're building some consensus around the direction that the city wants to go when it comes to adding additional housing, and that we're not moving against the wishes of the community.
Gotcha. That I would think that overall it'd be all pieces of the subcommittees, land use would get reviewed and, not just specifically this group and this topic, but I would imagine there would have to be a draft form. Because even when the city did the downtown strategic plan, which is, that plan is going to get interwoven into this comprehensive plan. We had public engagement pieces with downtown business owners, the general public, higher education. We had multiple ones, so I find it hard to believe that there wouldn't be one when it comes to the comprehensive plan. I'll look out and confirm on that.
What's next?
So are we at the point where you want us to go home and work on this or what's?
Yep, you can work on it here, we can work on it here, you can work on it at home. Say next Tuesday or Wednesday, and toss it back to me, and any questions anytime, shoot me an email, give me a call.
I am curious, Nick, just a question. Are we going to, as subcommittees, have an opportunity for conversation with the other subcommittees, like the land use, for instance? Or, I don't know, and I don't know if there is like a necessity around that, but I feel like some of these things are gonna have a lot of crossover. Would we have conversations with the other subcommittee on what their discussions are, they're talking about at this point?
I'll ask Carlos to see if that's part of the process. For right now, how we'll say if the interwoven thoughts of land use to housing, how those are being communicated is notes that I take and provide to all of us are also provided to Carlos and Luke and Lucy. And we do have conversations about the overlapping. I mean, for example, we try to bring that up to the other subcommittee. So with our last meeting, it was brought up about, underutilization of land. And then it was brought up as examples, green space, parkland, could be Westfield Golf Course. That was previously brought up in the land use subcommittee. So there is the conversation that staff is facilitating the thoughts of each subcommittee back and forth. But I'll
Okay.
ask the question if there's plans for a larger group setting, such as, maybe it's housing with land use and transformative projects. But I'll flush that out. Yeah.
And that would be appreciated. I don't want to add more work to our plate and more meetings, because I know we're all busy, but I also, as long as we know that we're all on the same page to some degree, I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, most definitely. Along with that, even if there's not a large group setting or meeting, Jovi, I'll request as all these subcommittees are moving through the drafts like we are now in putting our discussions to paper, that I receive copies of the other subcommittee drafts. And then I can screen those, that if there's any topics that are pertinent to housing, then I can distribute those out to you, flush any additional thoughts upon this subcommittee.
I think that would be great. I think it would be helpful.
As I'm looking through these, Nick, could you explain what 1C means?
What that would be there would be, I'll say it'd be a protection of RS zoning, which is strictly only allows for single family homes. Whereas with R1 and R2, they allow for duplexes, and more density. So that would be one that would, I guess, throw the protection in of single family neighborhoods, such as, we'll say up on Garden Height, a lot of those, I believe those neighborhoods are designated as RS, or back behind the middle school, like Clubview Drive. I believe that's another pocket within the city that zoned RS. So that's what that would mean right there. Oh, you're on mute there. Sorry, Amanda.
Sorry. That statement is encouraging those RS ones to remain that way.
That would be correct.
I guess I thought we were hoping to see some duplexes become possible in some of those types of communities. Take a Valley Oaks home that was designed large and somebody had less needs. Maybe they might convert that to a duplex so that it became, or so it continued to be viable in retirement. Is that something we thought might add value for folks?
That's definitely one of the thoughts that came through. That particular portion, that 1C of maintaining the integrity, is why I put that in there of a neighborhood where a lot of our in the core of Winona, we don't have RS zoning. So that's mainly where we're looking at for, I guess, where my thought was of increasing the traditional development pattern which would be in the core of the city and not so much the outlining areas. Whereas there's other areas within the draft that I do have of promoting the mix of single family with duplexes and triplexes. So there's both, I guess there's both angles within this. And that's also one of the things that if we don't want that as part of the goals or objectives, we just redline that one and that's removed from this draft one.
Okay, yeah, but as I was thinking about the small cities presentation that I went to at the Friendship Center, and it sounded like one of his interests in making those communities become viable from a taxing standpoint was to, instead of expanding outward, make better use of the space that's there. So I guess I would recommend striking that one. And then, which is not to say that it shouldn't be preserved, but I wouldn't necessarily endorse it as a targeted goal. You know, it's the way that it is right now. But if the community there said, hey, we want our section of town to be more productive from a tax standpoint, or I don't know why anybody would say that, but we wouldn't necessarily want to prevent them from taking those steps, right?
Understood.
Is there a way to wordsmith that in like through community engagement to determine what areas are optimal to keep that, you know, if there's a and again, I'm at the same presentation, that's kind of what I felt like Chuck was saying. If you have a neighborhood who says absolutely not in my backyard, then you move to the neighborhood who is more interested in diversifying housing. And so is there a way to put that in the plan that says through community engagement to identify what areas this could be done? And I think there, again, going back to what we said at the last meeting, knowing that there has to be an educational piece for the community of what we're proposing and what that might look like.
I think when he was saying that, he was talking about prioritizing infrastructure investments for communities that embrace that increase in density. So that it was a way to that, you know, we'd say, yeah, I know you'd love to have more roads. We're not going to actually focus on fixing your roads because this neighborhood is upside down. We're going to focus on fixing the roads in the community where they've prioritized density because there's a better return on our investment there.
At this time, who in the city, who's doing the identifying, encouraging, promoting, and other actions proposed on this draft plan?
Who's promoting it?
Who's doing, who's identifying, who's encouraging, who's promoting, who's providing all the action, all the, what, yeah, what's the action at this time? Who is in the city going to do all these proposals physically?
Well, I guess when it comes to, we'll take 1A, identify, promote, resource allowable, known as the age in place. That's when I would get that telephone call, speak about available programs, and then refer that person to Amanda. When it comes to encourage public and private reinvestment improvements to the existing housing stock, that would be community development, mainly me, writing grant applications to be able to get funding from Minnesota DEED, Minnesota Housing, which all that ties into the private investment, or at least home rehab, is usually with those programs, we ask that the homeowner, if they make above a certain dollar amount, that they contribute to the investment within their own home. And then if it's larger rehab projects, like say an apartment, to be able to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, or if it's new housing, that would be a combination of myself, Lucy, my supervisor, along with port commissioners and city council for, we'll say, like a TIF district, to be able to push those forward.
Correct me if I'm wrong, are these, now, when we do these goals and objectives, these aren't gonna be goals and objectives that are written somewhere to follow? Or Or are they, so these are goals and objectives from each comprehensive plan that's gonna be used to write the comprehensive plan, or I'm sorry, from each subcommittee to write a comprehensive plan. So these will just be ideas that'll be used to come up with other goals or comprehensive plan and goals and objectives into that. So that's what I'm saying, these aren't gonna be written anywhere, or are they?
These would be part of the housing section within the comprehensive plan.
I wasn't sure if they were just ideas or, that's a good question, that who's gonna be.
Right.
Well, the city, is the city the person, is what you're saying, or?
Well, no, I read who in the city, which is this, everything you primarily falls to you.
Primarily.
Okay, and who else?
Primarily me, and then after that would be Lucy. Areas where it gets involved with any type of rezoning, that would fall to Carlos and Luke.
I guess the point I'm getting to is, this is a lot for one person, and my thought is to, in order to actually see these come to fruition, the city would need to allocate resources and personnel to achieve these, and this committee could suggest that.
Yep, and from your previous, I forget where I inserted it at. There was something in here. I know I had it
No, there is a hiring request in here somewhere.
someplace. I know I inserted
I
that.
saw it
Okay.
there.
It was more or less, I believe, talking about how I interpret it from listening to our last meeting was like at the senior center, so more for seniors and low income. And I might have added language for those that are disabled or needing supportive services.
Okay.
But when it comes to like who would do something, we'll say 1I, so provide homeowners with a design handbook to assist homeowners how to appropriately update their homes. So that could fly through the Heritage Preservation Committee, and then with planning and zoning, like how can we develop a home on one of our half lots? So that would follow Carlos and Luke on that one. A lot of there's other items in here where there are already existing partnerships. So for the home stretch for home buyer education, that's something that I worked with the folks at Three Rivers and at Centra to be able to bring that to Winona. So that's nothing that staff necessarily, I guess, completes the 8-hour course. We just were able to bring in the resources to be able to have the source available to local folks. Along with there's another one in there about the Minnesota City Participation Program. So that's Minnesota Housing Startup Program for first-time home buyers with closing costs and down payment assistance. That's me filling out an application, Minnesota Housing every year, taking it to the council, sending it up to the state, because since we've been involved with it since 16, since I've been here, we've been awarded every year. That's just one of those easy programs for the community that we keep on getting that funding. So some are low hanging fruit.
Well, and some of the things like encourage households to have a home energy audit performed. I can imagine that could go out to like be a postcard developed and mailed out. You know, when somebody comes in to speak to somebody about their home, it can be like, oh, and also here's the resources to have a home energy audit performed.
Most definitely. A couple of years ago, and where that kind of plays in is that, well, it's really important, but is that the city of Winona, we were an energy partner with Excel. We had an energy team, John Howard, city staff, he was the main person. I was on there. We worked, and there was plenty of community members and even county staff that was part of this overall committee, and then circled in on the city. In any type of application I received for rehab, homeowner rehab, I requested that they get an energy audit. They always received the pamphlet. We had a gentleman come in the office yesterday afternoon that was ranting and raving about nothing that the city could do, was all a state issue. Lead-based paint. Him and I had a conversation about lead rules and lead contractors, and he's buying this newer to him, but older home. And that's exactly what I handed him, is the home energy audit brochure. If you might be able to get this for free, then it opens up the door for energy assistance, weatherization, just all little, I call them small hits, but as they, all these add up, it preserves one's household income, especially on a fixed income. So that's usually when the opportunities arise, there's staff around to be able to provide information.
And so this, if I remember, is a 2045 plan, so it's not adding things to your to-do list all this year. You know, it's like, okay, how many are immediate, how many are 5 years, how many are 10 years?
Right. In overall comprehensive plan, it's the guiding document moving forward, where, for example, with the land use committee, they're going to designate certain parcels of land in the future be rezoned. For an example, down on the riverfront where Michael's Lighting used to be, back in 07, that was designated to be rezoned to R3. It's still zoned industrial. That's just because the project hasn't come forward for it. But it's that guiding principle that will allow it in the future to be able to change a use.
I don't know if you trailed off there, Nick, but did you say why that hasn't been rezoned to R3?
There hasn't been a project come forward to demand it to be rezoned.
Would it be possible to rezone it to be mixed use that could be either industrial or R3? That way people know that it's an opportunity. I don't know if that's how it works. Maybe I'm.
Like in the new comprehensive plan, it sure could be, even with how the existing one is, where it's recommended to be zoned R3. If somebody comes forward with a mixed use where they want to do some sort of commercial coffee shop or retail on the bottom and do residential up on top, I would imagine that would have enough legs to be rezoned with the comp plan amendment. But yeah, even moving forward, if the current land use committee identifies that is, it shouldn't be strictly for residential use, it should have a mix to it. They recommendation for sure.
So you're wanting us to look at this and just go through this. You're not wanting us to turn this into this.
I'm looking for, if you see anything on here that really trips your trigger that you don't want it in there, or you want it in there but stated differently, to make those changes. This is for your ideas that aren't on here.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So
Wrote on this draft you gave me. I'm
It's
hoping to keep it.
all yours, all yours. Yeah, so how I'm seeing this, we're at the step of, we have a lot of great ideas now. It's time to wordsmith them, clean them up. Whatever staff is missed from our meetings, mentioned or not mentioned, that we haven't included. And then from there,
So who wrote all the other drafts? I just wondered if the language is going to be similar across the whole comp plan, like for all the other subcommittees.
I couldn't tell you who wrote the other drafts.
Okay, I just wondering
Yeah.
if like, if you write a draft and this subcommittee writes the draft and then the other subcommittees, then we have very different language.
Yeah.
Of how that'll.
Yeah, maybe,
fit together.
yeah, a different team. I'm assuming that's where the consultants would
Oh,
come into
that's
play
good.
to
That's true, yes.
take care of that. So like for these drafts that I authored those. Carlos will do the ones for the land use committee. John Howard will do the ones for environmental. I think between Lucy and I, we do the ones for economic development. So, and then from there, we'll get compiled into Luke and Carlos, and then the consultants who I believe will shiny it all up into a pretty document for us.
Right.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, because, you know, like 2A, if you want them all to start out as action intentions, then I would say, you know, like develop and redevelop. I would
Oh,
change,
yep.
I wouldn't start with your infill.
Yep, and I started putting this together about, I think 2:30 this afternoon, because I was told I was gonna
That's fine. No,
have
it's great.
this
It's
one
great.
yesterday, so I was gonna try to make it look all nice and pretty for everybody, but
No, it's
we're not
great.
gonna have time.
This is super helpful to see
Yeah.
everything compiled together. I was just curious in the long, like, future.
Yep, and I'll add more I guess for the next one, there's definitely thoughts that have been communicated through the meetings that I do not have in this draft one, but I will insert them into this template that then I'll also insert any new and other ideas that are provided by the subcommittee into one master document for us to review and kick around and see what we actually want to have for the final product.
We will go over this one more, at least one time before it gets sent to the.
Well, the goals and
Well,
objectives,
the-
most definitely, Joseph. Yeah, yep,
Before it's sent down.
yep.
I want to comment on, I'm sort of thinking about what you had said about who's in charge of making this happens. And then I was thinking about that idea of this comprehensive plan. To me, like, the Board of Adjustments would make, adjustments to like setbacks and so forth. I look to the comprehensive plan to make it to understand what the needs are in that area to see if the variance coincides with that. So it's helpful to volunteers as well as not, to make a decision, planning commission or council or everything. So I think more than just him doing the job, it relates to a lot of people that are volunteers because we don't know what the neighborhoods want. For example, if we're in R2 zoning, there's a single family with 5 residents in there that's a rental, and somebody wants to make it into a duplex. When we look at the zoning, the comprehensive plan, say, well, is that what we're looking for in that area, duplexes? And if the answer is yes, well, why wouldn't we encourage that? Because they need a variance for setbacks, which everything does. So to me, this really helps everybody else that may not know what the needs are, volunteers especially, that are on those boards. So I think a lot of that falls on volunteers more than even, or the volunteers are people on boards that don't know what they know, so I was just thinking about that. So that's that, knowing that can help you, help everybody else.
Yeah.
On Board of Adjustments, council, planning and zoning, that's where we get our max from, comprehensive plan. So I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, most definitely. Yep.
You find in the case that developers reference the comp plan alongside with zoning maps and things like that.
Most definitely,
Okay.
especially when it comes to. A couple examples would be language of density within the comp plan, especially when you go from a zoning change. Having that land use designation also is the big thing. It just helps out so much more on the process. I mean, developing housing is very complex. It can be very heated. I mean, even with the property on Mankato Avenue, that developer went and pounded the doors and those neighbors spoke with them, tried to get out in front. We had Board of Adjustment because that had to be rezoned. There was a comp plan amendment or a map change, had to go to council. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts. So provided that we at least keep the door open with having language within the comp plan helps out tremendously with developers. Because if they come into a situation that they have to rezone a property where they have to go through an entire process where it's not already set up to be rezoned, but they have to make that fight. They have to go through all the community engagement to try to get buy-in. If it's hard for them, they're going to go to the other community where it's not a struggle.
And the other thing is too, if a developer says, hey, this is the area and the comprehensive plan says we need more density here, I'm gonna buy these lots into this project. And it has to have a rezoning change or a variance. Well, then when it comes to boards, whether it's the city council board adjustment or anything else, there's gonna be somebody saying, well, I have a single family home and I bought this thinking that, or whatever, and you go, well, you can tell them this is the comprehensive plan. This is how it's written. This is the zoning. This is how it is. So his development is meant to fit here by the powers that be that decided, which means the community. So it helps everybody understand where they're at when you're at those meetings. It really does. It's, hey, this is what they want. This is the way it sits. That's what I've had.
In the further Chris' point, like the Board of Adjustment, just having language in there is a concrete example. So down by the Ace Hardware store, so in downtown Fringe. So that has a height limit on how tall a building can be constructed there. Current property owner, he came, had to go all the way through council and everything else, mainly because it's already zoned downtown Fringe. Within the comp plan, it's not stating that it should have a future a different land designation in the future to be able to provide the Board of Adjustment with any type of information to like, yep, this is the direction the city wants to take in the future. It would have made their jobs a lot easier when they're evaluating the criteria to provide an a variance for that particular project or not. So I mean, it's advantageous to kind of have our ducks in a row, think bigger. It's used as a guideline. Not everything's going to happen, but we're not shutting the door on things either. So.
That's why I think like maintaining the historic value of some of the neighborhoods will help with some of the single family homeowners too, when they look at something like this and they're worried about zoning changes. They're also saying we want to preserve the historic nature of it while increasing density. So
See, that's what's important wording, because when somebody that doesn't know anything about what the comprehensive says, but has to make decisions that count, can use that as you know, guidance. It's important. Like you're saying, the words are important.
Yeah. I don't have any more questions or comments at this time.
When is our next meeting?
We gotta
Okay.
set that.
That's-
We feel that. What did we decide on that with R3? Were we gonna address that, or did we feel that was addressed somewhere in here?
Where's the R3? Where's that?
You know, the community members.
Where was the change? Where was it the change? I don't understand.
I guess they,
Who was the idea of that?
we've heard that that was kind of what the city was guiding towards and didn't like it.
That really doesn't have anything to do with us, it's only change right now, I don't think.
I think what they're saying is they would like to have it so that the language doesn't say, you know, this area should be denser and, you know, so I don't know.
That would be the land use committee more than us. Wouldn't it? Because that would set, the land use is gonna set the guidance for the zoning, the zoning would set the density and the rules for what can be done there. So that would be more land use committee. I would think.
And the language that is currently being used by the housing subcommittee is to allow owner occupied duplexes, triplexes. I don't think I inserted any quads within the language, but to be reflective of Winona's traditional development pattern. So that it's not really saying to go change the zoning. A lot of our R2 zoning will allow for triplexes, but then it comes to the zoning of what the setbacks are. So I guess the language that we're shooting for is trying to get density that would reflect our traditional development patterns. And we could go walking around town and you'll walk through a neighborhood, even down by, for example, down by Volunteer Services in Watkins. You're going to see single family homes, you're going to see duplexes, you're going to see fourplexes all the way through there in a 2-block area. And it's always been that way. You know, but if somebody tried to do the same thing today, because of setbacks and zoning, you would not be able to. So I guess from staff perspective, I did not insert anything in there to do Minneapolis and remove all R1 zoning and allow multifamily throughout the entire city. There's that type of language is not present.
I do think that the owner occupied, I think what they're kind of getting at is the neighborhood wouldn't mind owner occupied, but they don't want, you know, let's go duplexes, not owner occupied, you know, because if we open up an area that promotes duplex and triplexes that are, you know, traditional single family, then developers or landlords like us are gonna buy it and make it into, you know, triplexes for rental. Instead, but that's not encouraging family use.
Right.
So I think that's gonna be a clear definition saying, hey, if we're gonna have open this neighborhood up to duplexes, only, you know, an area only owner occupied and it can't be changed back. That would keep the families together. I think that would together, keep people in the neighborhood that are invested, keep the balance there.
Yep.
Not that I don't want to go develop stuff. I do. We do. But we also want to have our city looking nice and feeling.
quick question about the setbacks. Do you have to rezone to change the setback requirements? Or can we amend the setback requirements for R2 zoning?
That's complicated. That's really complicated.
The short answer on that is most likely you could. I guess, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but the most likely path would be a variance to the setback requirement.
Yeah, so the setbacks are in the ordinances, so they'll have R1, R2, R3 and setbacks, and then the setbacks also go up. It's an R3, but it's next to an R1. You gotta have the setbacks in R1. So it gets really complicated in the way those are presented, so that we see a lot of those at the Board of Adjustment. And then we use common sense and we use the language in these things to help make a decision where it should be, because I mean, if you have a commercial next to an R1, you gotta do height restrictions to R1, it just gets really complicated. To change those, they'd have to go back and change the ordinance itself. And all the ordinances and the language in it, so that would be really complicated. And it's not even about zoning, it's about the rules inside a zone. And each zone differently. We see a lot of those variances.
Are there, I guess that's not something I've looked at into detail, but are there rules in there that are, it's like, if this, then that? Does that make sense?
Yes, there are.
Well, it's like, for instance, if you got like an R3, you're saying, he's saying there's an R3 next to an R, or a small area of R3 encouraging R3. Well, the properties that are touching an R1, say an R3 has a height of 4,
Right.
right? And an R1 has a height of 2.5. Well, if it's touching that R1, it's got to go to the R1 setbacks, so it blends in. So
Okay.
next to that, then you have to do it this way. But if it's in the middle of an R3, then you don't have to get a variance because you can go 4 stories. You know, so, like I said, it's real complicated because everything touches everything and it all affects everything. And they're trying,
Right.
it doesn't go from one to the other right away.
Yeah. And that offers some clarity. And I guess, going back to like some of the concerns of citizens that were brought up, I mean, I had kind of rebutted with the owner occupied sentiment of, if we were to allow a little bit more densification, if somebody wanted to turn their home into a duplex and that sort of thing. And the concern from one individual was, well, what if someone buys a home for their college student, calls it owner occupied because their child or whoever's on there, and then it turns into this college housing place. And so there was a lot of discussion from multiple people asking about enforcement when we are talking about these proposed changes.
Once that college.
I don't know.
They would have to sell the house.
So, no, well, what happens is if the college is owner occupied, it's not certified, doesn't have to be certified. I'm sorry, we're taking over. We do this all the time.
Yep.
So you have one rental that's a rental, another one's not certified. Well, the one that's a rental, it has to have a rental certificate. The one that's owner occupied does not. Once they move out, then that owner would have to go and get a rental certificate and the city would have to come. And at that point, they would say, well, you cannot do that. This can't be certified because it's an owner occupant. You have to sell this to somebody with an owner. And the city wouldn't let them do it, correct?
Mhm.
That would all be protected, and if there was duplex that are owner occupied, and that's what I'm saying, we have to say that and encourage that, and that's only if it be, because after that, they can't just turn it to rental, or it'd be a legal rental.
I mean, some of the loopholes they can, but if it's a parent buying a house for their college age student, it does not have to be rental certified. Other folks, what they have done is they've sold homes contract for deed. Well,
Sure.
they're not really planning long-term to purchase the home, but that's a loophole to get around the rental certification.
But I think
Right.
we used, like when I was younger and I was selling real estate, I had a lot of friends that were in their 20s, and almost every one of them, I sold them duplexes on the East End especially, because then they use the rental to subsidize their payment. And half of the people that I've done that to, we're all older now, they've actually turned it back into single family because they had kids, but they kept their certificate in case they could sell it either way.
Mhm.
But they can't go back, they can't sell it as a duplex. It'd have to be a rental with the owner occupied. So that's what I'm saying. That's a good tool for people that are younger. They may not have kids yet, but can expand. And that's what I think that I'm saying should be encouraged. And people should understand, we're not trying to say, just push a bunch of duplexes or triplexes. Let's encourage homes for people that have subsidized income.
Yeah, and people that gain wealth
Right,
over
right.
time, and then potentially be that move up buyers and
Yes.
to let that home cycle back again through the market.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, to Chris's point, we do need to really like have that language in there so that it's clear. The other thing that I will bring up as a concern, again, from a couple of people was developers, which is happening all across the nation. These large developers are coming in, they're buying out these single family homes and then re-renting them as single family homes. And I think a lot of this concern is that the housing committee is proposing to remove the 30% rule or amend it in a way that might allow for this to happen. And so I don't necessarily, I wish I could say I had a solution for this at this point, but I just want to bring it to our committee as a concern.
Yeah, I hear you there. I'll say as staff, I'll make the recommendation not to even touch the language of 30% rule.
Mhm.
I don't see that going away at all. And then to the previous point of owner occupied, I just want to point out just the language of 2D as we talk about that. Maybe that's a statement right there that gets a little wordsmith evaluated. But it does sound like that is something that we want to keep incorporated within the draft language.
It was a 30% rule. That's only for R1. That's not for R2, R3, is it?
For R3 does
Yeah,
not
or-
pertain.
R2 then? either?
R2, I believe it does. I think R3 is the only exempt district from the 30% rule, but they still have to.
And B1, B2, all that.
Yep, but the off-street parking requirements still apply.
So what else, for clarification, that 30% rule doesn't apply for everything, and maybe it should, but then maybe it should be clear where it does apply, or maybe restrictive or more restrictive, that should be a thought too, and how it's used. Because half the stuff in 30% rule is already 90% rental. When they made that 30% rule, we increased our rentals by 50%. It did exactly opposite of what it was supposed to do. So now we gotta say, well, where are those? Does it make sense to have 30% rule on a 90%? 90%, property or a block, and how do we work with that? Will that, should we let the last one be a rental or not? I'll give you an example, a quick example. We had a board of adjustments meeting a long time ago. This lady lived in this house for 100 years. Maybe they had it forever. And it was right next to campus, and she was the last house to be there. And her husband died, and there was a duplex, set up duplex, like died in the 80s, and then they had their kids living up there. And she paid taxes, the whole for a duplex, paid everything. And then she had died. Their family wanted to turn it back into a duplex, but she couldn't. But it was already a duplex, so there was nothing she could do to get a duplex either. But it was a duplex. And she had lived there and she probably paid for the whole block over 10 times over how long she was there. I felt so bad because it was the last one on the block. But since it was a 30% rule, does that make it? Was that right to do? I don't know. I think we denied her because of the 30% rule. We're sticking to it so good. But I didn't feel like it was the right thing to do because, it's strict him. But it just thought about it,
Yep.
Is that right or wrong? And where does it apply? If you're gonna think about it.
Yep. I guess with that, with that example of, 90% of all the other parcels are already rentals on a given block. I'll play around with some language, you throw that idea on your template. And,
I think it would be worthwhile. I know somebody else who is 60 something years old, who's stuck in her mother's home and hasn't been able to sell it because everything else is rental and can't sell it as a single family home. And she can't sell it as a place that could be a rental. So she's just stuck.
And do we have to stop 30% rule, or should we put language in there saying, hey, we should take a good look at things that are already 90%, some encouragement instead of saying, because we didn't give them the variance because everybody's like, oh, 30% rule can't break it, it's gonna set precedents, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So, can we have something in there to say, well, there should be some exceptions on the 30% rule, some rules to it, Grandma's been there for 100 years, and she needs to sell it. It's already set with a duplex. Sorry, we should.
There's already exemptions anyways, an exception, so having something just like you're saying, that just says any block that is over X% could be considered exempt from the 30% rule.
Or encourage a owner occupied on that particular thing, something like that.
Yeah.
Say, hey, we'll give you a triplex, but ones that are owner occupied, somebody will live there.
Yeah.
Oh, just thoughts.
Yep, I'll try to do some research on what X or that threshold,
Yeah, what
that
would that
percentage
threshold
could be.
It gets complicated when they're throwing 30% rule. So,
What you said, throw numbers, yeah, you can change it around a little bit, stuff changes, it gets complicated.
it's not ambiguous. Every block is different.
Mhm.
It really is.
Changing topic, Nick, would
Yeah.
you have the time to do a brief outline of covenants in Winona and what is currently, what's currently possible through covenants? Or maybe that's the.
I wouldn't be, no, I guess I would,
That's not brief.
no, you know, like the Port Authority, on their land, they have covenants, where then also some of the, as Chris brought up with the senior housing, they have covenants, but be able to track those covenants down.
Or just what sort of things is it allowable for a covenant to control in a, let's say residential, because you're talking housing.
They can control whatever they want. So the covenants are built by the developers, not
Yeah.
the city. That's the developers' rules. And so they can put whatever they want. And when they sell you that lot, you have to abide by that. The city has no control to enforce that. The covenants have nothing to do with the city and they can't control it. So,
But, okay.
so yes, so what happens is if somebody breaks a covenant, then the home, all the rest of the homeowners in that neighborhood have to sue that person. They can't go to the city and say, hey, they put up a purple fence and we said we can't have it. The city has no control over that. That's the ordinances. So any covenants are made by the developer and then they have to be sued. So there's a difference in covenants and ordinance.
But can the city choose to ban covenants?
Ben?
Ban covenants.
Yeah. Well, that's a big
That's a
one.
good
I mean,
idea.
if somebody, there's neighborhoods where you can't put a clothesline up and energy costs are spiking. I mean,
That's a real estate legality thing. We deal with that a lot when I sold real estate transactions covenants. And people getting sued over like building a house next on an empty lot or something, or building a house. They can even limit the square footage of the house or make a bigger house. Some covenants like in Country Meadows say you have to have 1,800 square foot, no less.
Yeah.
So if you build a smaller house, they could sue you and make you tear it down. So I think it's a legal thing more than a city ordinance thing to me, but that's a good question. Can they?
Yeah, I'll ask the city attorney.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all.
That's a really good question.
Mhm.
Well, when did you decide on your next week?
I haven't yet,
Can
Dave.
you email me? I gotta go upstairs.
Everybody that, yep.
Thanks, everybody.
How about the 27th? I'm gone the week of the 18th and I don't know. Let's do two, because Luke's will be back next week. Does everybody be available on Wednesday, the 20th at 4 o'clock? No,
No, I'm on vacation that week too.
27.
Did you say Wednesday, the 20th?
yeah, the 20th or the 27th. I'm gone the week of the 18th. It sounds like Crystal is also.
The 27th is the Minnesota Housing Institute.
Oh, that's that.
It's at 4 o'clock. So if we did it earlier than 4, it's almost good time to drive to Rochester.
I can do the 20th.
I can do the 20th, but we'll be out of town on the 27th.
All right. Yeah. Goes up 20th work for you.
At this time, but whatever the majority, whoever can.
All right.
Make the most of
We'll do next meeting. Then July 20th. I'll try to zoom in if I'm able to. And still good for 4 o'clock. All right.
So I will not. be
That was good.
on Island, as you know.
No service. All right. That's
Your
perfect.
whole
We'll
bit
touch
is
base.
yourself.
before.
Yeah, when do you want these returned?
Drafts returned, edited, I don't know, next Tuesday, Wednesday.
Okay.
Something like that.
I'll put July 13th for that.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks, Nick. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Yeah, you too.
Have a good day.